welcome to Future Proof Mzansi, a podcast where we discuss how consumer behavior shapes our marketing plans. I'm Stacey.
And I'm Senna, and we're colleagues at Kantar and your hosts. On this podcast, we interview the most creative minds and innovative thinkers about the many impactful brands in the country and why we love them.
We discuss what makes South Africans tick, why they do the things they do, and what those things are.
And most importantly, through our discussions, we offer practical advice about how to build brands of tomorrow.
Senna, I am super excited about this episode because it's sure to be full of nostalgia and an interesting discussion around how ads in South Africa have evolved over the years.
Yeah, Stacey. Okay, so following the first two episodes on creative learnings and sort of how to make ads that appeal to audiences, we decided to take a trip down memory lane, and we're going to throw it back. And similar to the Netflix show, The Movies That Made Us, we have decided to do an episode on the ads that made us.
And I would be lying if I told you that we came up with this topic ourselves. It actually came from our colleague, Saiesh Ajudhiya. So we thought it would be fitting to interview him today. Sai is Kantar South Africa's head of media and creative and has had several roles in Kantar over the years, as well as working for many of our big brands in South Africa, including most recently Tiger Brands, as their CMI business partner.
Sai, we're so excited to have you on the podcast. Thank you for joining us today to discuss the ads that made us.
Thanks, guys, and thanks for thinking of me as a creative genius.
Sai, this is an interesting topic because there are so many ads that we can remember from our childhood. So before we dive in, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself and your career journey so far?
Cool, thanks, Stacey. So, I think the first thing to know about me is I'm one of the strange people, and annoyingly to my wife, even though we PVR a show, I sometimes pause and rewind to watch the ads during the ad break. So I've always loved ads ever since I was a little kid. I think they're awesome, they're fun, they're entertaining. I'm really privileged and honored to be here to talk about something that I truly love. I've had my run around the mill, having worked in agency and then run a small business, and learned quite a lot about innovation and the commercial sides of running a business. I've been then in client side, which really opened my mind to some of the challenges that our clients face, and really changed my perspective and how we approach things. My formal background is I'm a research psychologist. I'm an avid fly fisherman. I love the bush. In fact, I'm about to go on a long holiday in the bush, although I'm not sure if we're going to relax that much because it's a huge family reunion. I don't know who thought of this idea, but it's going to be 31 people in Kruger Park from tomorrow. So wish all the people who are looking for peace and quiet good luck. That's me in a nutshell.
So when you're not rewatching ads, you're fly fishing or disrupting the Kruger Park.
100%. Although these days, being a parent to a toddler, it's quite challenging to fly fish because, as you know, toddler's idea of fun is very different to my idea of fun.
No, I doubt his idea of fun is rewatching YouTube ads, but I'm glad that is your idea of fun. Perfect guess for our show today. Cool. Thanks, Sai. Thanks for sharing a little bit about yourself. I want to talk a little bit about ads, which is obviously why we have brought you kicking and screaming into our virtual room today. A few years ago, Kantar looked at the best liked ads for the past 35 years. We looked at them from 1984, the year before I was born, up to 2018. There were many ads in there that we can discuss today, but the one that was found to be the best ad of all time was Sasol's Glug ad, which was in 1991. And that's the one with the little boy who fills his car with the Sasol tank, with the petrol, and then he speeds off with his dog in hot pursuit. Why do you think this ad was so loved?
Oh gosh, what a classic ad, and I think many of us tried to reenact that exact same scene as little kids after seeing it, probably with little success. But I think, what's really beautiful about that ad is this wonderful element of surprise. And I think, for both the protagonist and the viewer for seeing it the first time, and, even every time you watch it, that wonderful reaction. And quite interestingly, with that particular ad, I mean, if you think back then, um, it was all kind of rustic, and the ad industry wasn't as formalized as it is now. And one of the anecdotes from making the ad was that reaction of shock was the team having let off a gunshot in the background, and it's just purely natural. So I think the performance, and the beautiful setup of the story, and that absolute shock factor. I don't think South African audiences had seen anything like that during that time. So, a beautiful way of storytelling without having to use, much words or props, or changing environment. It's just very simplistic and visual in its nature. And then, of course, Gluk Gluk. I mean, that's just become synonymous with the brand. But when I think about it, and if you think about the type of conversations we have, and the thing we're always talking about is like, oh, how do we land this big sensorial moment, and we want to make it look attractive, and then you come to a category like petrol or fuel. Like, how do you bring a sensorial element to that, right? Because for me, I don't like the smell of petrol, but through the use of sound, and it almost drums up this visual image of gluk gluk, the petrol pouring. I think how clever, and very simple, but actually quite complex in the figurative use, and what it does to your mind implicitly. So I think in all of those elements, bringing them and stumbling into this beautiful ad, that for me is what makes it so iconic, and such a wonderful piece of content.
There was a remake of the ad in 2019, and that's where the little girl goes around making cars and a dog and a soccer player go faster. So I guess this glug glug thing seems to be something that we can recycle.
Yeah. So I think, just to think about, recycling a concept or a particular asset, Glug Glug is synonymous with Sasol and is iconic, and one would argue is a brand asset for them. And I think it's something, or an asset that can stand the test of time, because that's also a challenging thing, is once you land something big and seminal, and then you look at it years later, is does it still apply? Will it still have the same sort of, will it land the same message? And I mean, fundamentally, the product itself hasn't changed, but the positioning of the brand has evolved and changed over time. So I think what's, for me, what they've done is a great job of pulling those memory hooks, and something that, we all quite naturally associate and link to Sasol. But if you think of that moment of Gluk Gluk, it almost does multiple things. So it lands a sensorial element, then it functionally tells you, like, that's what it does. So Gluk Gluk, the fuel goes into the car, and then there's this wonderful emotional reaction that you have in the memory to the innocence of the child, and how they sort of perceive, what the fuel does to things. Landing their sort of reason to believe, their key messaging is that glug glug equals fuel equals make my car go faster, or make my car go. But like I said, the way that they've done, is not to recreate something that was, you know, a long time ago, and may not land the same way, and they may have been criticized for kind of being lazy, but taking it and putting it in a world, in a way that has more resonance to us and depicts our reality. And I quite like showing, the way she goes in these different settings, and also, using a girl in this instance, you know yeah, those are the things that stood out for me in the remake of that.
So there's another favorite, which is Klipdrift's Met Eish ad. Like a pretty ridiculous situation where this poor couple was abducted by a farmer, and the punchline was the cherry on top. What are your views on that ad?
Oh man, so that's again one of my all-time favorites. I don't think ever since I've seen that, have I ever asked for brandy and ice? It's always brandy and eish, or it's just become so such a staple. But when I think back about that ad, I think it's a really beautiful example of careful consideration from the cast to the setting to the story. I mean, if you think of the story, right, and we can't be naive to not acknowledge race tensions and the setting and these people being isolated. So, what would otherwise be quite a stressful, tense, highly anxious situation, the team quite cleverly navigate through that and move through it quite quickly. And the reason why it's important, and I mean, you obviously know with Kantar through the link solution, we've got the facial coding component that tracks people's spontaneous emotional responses to ads. And what we find is when you take a very dark and difficult and stressful or sad or angry or it's kind of difficult scenario, it drops people's emotion all the way down. So what I love about this is, you know, kudos to the director for how the characters manage and navigate the situation, because you can see they're distressed, but they're not like show these very intense, gross, negative emotions. And like I said, they move quite quickly to the settings that we're familiar. So they sit around the table, they share a meal. So, the brandy's poured out, and then you have the wonderful scene on the porch, and then they land the big punchline of met eish. You can create a bit of tension. Personally, I think it's really great and a lovely way to tell a story, but be conscious, and I think that's what they've done really well, is to set the scene and then quickly move you out and kind of bring light to the situation. And then, if you think it's almost become a colloquialism now, met Asia, how clever, again, simplicity. If we go back to the Sasol, there's absolute simplicity in it. And again, if you think about all that's happened, it's quite dramatic. So in this moment of the climax with the brand is involved in the moment of relief and in landing that, and I think it's wonderful, and yeah, everyone loves the Clippers and Coke.
Yeah, thanks, Sai. That
Amazing.
was a really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a really good one. You strike me as someone who is quite familiar with the Klipdrift and eish.
Met eish.
Other
Uh,
than being the life of the party, clearly. I also want to pick your brain about something. I want to switch a little bit and I want to talk about jingles, okay? Now, whether you love them or hate them, like, the thing is that they stick. They are in people's memories. And I think I can think of so many, especially growing up. Like, I want to be a Simba Chippy, or oh, Russ. Okay, I know I'm a horrible singer, but feel free to interject
no,
whichever
no
ones you.
comment.
Um, but there's just something about a good jingle. What is it, and how can brands get that right?
Oh man, I must admit I'm also a sucker for jingles. One of my favorite is all gold, taste
Ah,
real.
yes.
So you know, but whether they work or not, again, I'm going to be a bit frustrating, but also a bit of a gray area, right? Because it all depends on a number of factors. It depends on your brand, it depends on your positioning. So if you are doing a jingle, it mustn't just be for the sake of it, or because you're trying to create some viability. You got to think of the long-term implications of it. Can it stand the test of time? Because things change, people change. So I think that's a really important thing to kind of weigh up when looking to develop a jingle. But things to get it right. Of course, it's got to be catchy. It's got to be a easy sort of tune or melody that one can follow. It has to be simple, and of course, it needs to relate to the brand or the product. Otherwise, you're just doing it for creative license.
And Sai, similar to like a good jingle, I can also just think of like a good pop song. And there's been like so many examples that I can think of brands using like really popular songs. And although it can be really expensive to acquire the rights to use a popular song in an ad, sometimes it's often worth it. And I can just think of the Vodacom Meerkat, like
Oh,
dancing
yes.
ads. Also, them using Brenda Fassie's Vulindlela in the wedding ad. What is your take on popular music, and do you think that it works? And can you think of any examples of like really catchy tunes that made it on?
Sure. Okay, so that's, using popular music or, iconic pieces of music is quite similar to using big celebrities in your ad, right? So the challenge there is that when people think back, and now that you've asked me to think of examples, I can think of music titles, but I can't think of the ad or the brand. So I think that's the challenge, is to make sure that it doesn't overshadow or take away from what you're trying to achieve. And that's, of course, you want to land your brand and you want to land your message. So it needs to be a tool and an enabler rather than the thing that stands out. I get that it's probably going to, do you well, that it'll help people remember it, but I think it, like you've mentioned, the Vodacom one, they've done a really good job to use an, I mean, Brenda Fassie, come on, that was very tricky. But, the fact that you were still able to link the two tells me that, the way in which they constructed that story and the way in which they put that campaign together, it didn't take away from the Vodacom brand itself. And actually, come to think of it, Vodacom are generally quite good at using big names in music and producing quite good ads. I'm just thinking of, I don't know if you guys remember the one, it was years ago with the baby that they sent out of space and said, seize the moment, seize the day.
Seize
Do
the
you
day,
remember them?
yes.
Yeah.
Whatever's coming,
Um,
don't stand in my way. Yeah, I remember that one.
100%. So, they're actually a good example and a good case study for us to look at on how to get that right. Just while we're on music, I think music for me, rather than looking to big pop music or big names, it rather use it as a way to tell a story, so to help you build up tension or to create the prevailing emotion. In years of ad testing, we've seen where music can actually change um, the success of an ad or the way in which people engage with a story. So it can become a very important component when you're putting together an ad.
So, Sai, okay, you touched on this a little bit. I'm going to switch gears because when we think,
Okay.
you touched on it when you spoke about the Clippies example and the brand's ability to kind of put their finger on the pulse of societal discourse. So if I think of social commentary in an ad, one brand that has consistently gotten it right and also landing the humor is Nando's. And I can just think of so many memorable and just impactful ads. What do you say to this? Like, why do you think Nando's have been so successful in doing this and playing around with that?
Well, I guess we can just do a quick call out to one of the reasons they're successful is having the right people in place. So we all saw at the MAA the other day, Doug Place, winning Marketer of the Year. I mean, if you just think of the campaigns, I mean, they're always hilarious. But if you look at them, they're always on point and on the pulse, so they never miss a beat. But if I were to imagine that marketing team and their agency, they all have been empowered to enact, in the moment, and really embody this idea of being agile. So when something happens, content is produced, it's signed off, and it goes. I've worked on pieces where we're still 2 years down the line waiting for somebody in some country to sign it off. But I mean, we think about the components itself, right? So humor and satire sits at the heart of their content. But apart from just being really funny and entertaining, that moves, from the content itself to the in-store experience, to when you open the menu, to when you see the billboard driving down, Winnie Mandela, and they've got that huge billboard. So whatever the campaign is at the time, it's consistently applied across the touch points. I think they take this so seriously. I can't remember the exact title of the award, but it was, internal marketing. So their internal marketing mechanisms also won an award the other night. And so again, this shows the importance of, at a fundamental level, embodying your positioning right from within the organization through to the team, grilling the chicken, through to your agency, putting up the billboards, um, through to the digital content. So I think that just shows you how thoughtful and considerate they've been, um, and making sure that who they are and the essence of their brand is felt and understood, throughout. And it's not just a funny or satirical piece of content just for entertainment's sakes, right? Because that would be for nothing.
Sai, so we've discussed humor, taglines, jingles, and satire, emotion, all of the kind of key ingredients about what goes into a good creative. Are there any other like more weird or like not necessarily like obvious sort of examples of a key ingredient to make a good ad? Like what evokes the most? Is it babies? Is it children? Is it animals? What are some anything
I
else
had a
that
feeling we're going to come to this.
please,
It was,
you need to give us.
do babies work? Do I need a baby in my ad?
Oh,
The
well,
answer is yes, always yes, because babies are cute. Um, no, but in all seriousness, I kind of always say to people, when you make ads or content or whatever, you got to think of the initial reaction and how people will perceive that. And we talk about this advertising with emotion. So I think that is always a key tool in your arsenal, is to be able to construct, be it an image, an ad, something that will evoke a level of an emotive response. So, of course, babies, you'll always respond positively and warmly to a child. It's sort of in our DNA. But I think what what you need to think about is the art of storytelling, thinking out of the box. And what I've noticed is that there's what I'm calling sort of the age of realism, right? So, um, if you think of advertising 20 years ago, it was this hyper exaggeration or these fictional worlds or scenarios, and we still get elements of that. But I think people are responding better, to content that is more realistic to their world. But I say that with a big caveat, because we also don't want to make people feel super depressed. So I think there's a fine line to find, between demonstrating and having a world that's realistic, but also keeping it a little bit light and breezy, because we don't want to have these very sort of negative and sad connotations linked to your brand. There are times when you need to play it safe, and there are times where I think brands can be bold and challenge the category codes, turn the category on its head, challenge the norms, do something different. Don't be afraid. We're always looking for a checkbox, and definitely you'll come to Canton. We'll tell you, we know what, because we sit on the this big database of all these ads that we've tested, but we can't predict the future and we can't predict everything. So take a chance, use your gut, do something different, if you think of a couple of examples that come to mind. There's It's one of my favorite ads. I don't know if you guys have seen it. It's a Cadbury taxi ad, and it this beautiful story of everyone kind of going home at the end of the year and it's all festive and it's a busy taxi rank and they get into the taxi and off they go and there's kind of this chatter in the taxi and you don't really know what's going on and they stop at a gas station. I sound so American. A gas station, a petrol station, and the lady walks in and she comes back in the taxi and she hands a slab of Cadbury to the back and you're like, what's going on? And everyone then gets to their destination and the taxi driver gets out and he bids his passengers farewell after this long journey. And then he goes to get back into the taxi, and there's this beautiful slab of Cadbury Dairy Milk with a little note, from the passengers saying thank you. And it was such a heartfelt um, story that for me is not typical of the category and typical of Christmas advertising. I think there are themes and motifs that are similar, but almost challenging that. So it's a beautiful ad. And then he breaks it, and in again, not although they've challenged it, not departing from key elements of Cadbury is the sharing, and he breaks off a block and hands it to a young boy in sitting. So it's just a wonderful story. Um, Another one, tell me when to stop talking, but another one that comes to mind
Yeah.
is Heineken did a ad, I think it was 2 years ago. Uh, Absolutely brilliant. It was a global ad with, it was all these sort of women or having a Heineken beer in a bar or different settings watching football. And at the end is this tagline, cheers to all fans, men included. And again, what a nice way of challenging the category, but still, paying homage to the key elements that make Heineken a beautiful beer.
I think speaking of difference and also, being bold and pushing the envelope, some commentators have said that it's becoming harder to be creative because we do live in a society where we're more sensitized to sort of societal dynamics. And they argue that, for fear of evoking certain like negative responses, that's inhibiting their creativity. What is your take on this? Do you agree with this, or do you think there's ways around this concern?
So I don't agree with this at all because I don't think it's become harder. I think it's just become different. And if you look at the South African society and the landscape, we have gone through different phases and we've just had to adapt and think differently and in many parts for the better, right? So I think the thing here is to challenge the way we think, and really kind of grapple and get uncomfortable with how we work through this notion of inclusivity and diversity. And I think one of the ways in doing that is the people who are making the ads, the decision makers, the marketeers, they themselves and their teams and units need to think about how they construct themselves to be representative of this very different and dynamic and diverse world. So when you sit and think about, okay, how do I create an ad that represents this? I'm living it and breathing it. Actually, let's just think of some examples. So there was this. Oh, I keep saying it's one of my favorite. I feel like all ads are my favorite, but a really stunning Johnny Walker ad. I'm just trying to remember the sort of theme about that was the three different protagonists had to overcome all the haters out there, and again using a cast that they wouldn't typically use and a setting that they wouldn't, but the messaging is consistent with keep walking. So, a wonderful demonstration of there are universal truths that even though we are different and look different and feel different and live different, there are certain universal realities that we all deal with. And I would say those are the things that brands should be looking to tap into when trying to, create something that's different and representative.
Nice. I love that you love so many ads, Sai. That is really cool to kind of feel your passion for ads. And really just a big thank you for joining us today. I feel like this is the beginning of so many discussions that we could have gone down, and there's plenty more episodes to come around those topics. So thank you. And I want to end today with one last question to you, which is looking to the future.
Oh,
What one trend do you expect to see playing out in South African ads?
so you remember there was this big blow up about emotional advertising, right? And all ads came out with many brands came up with these huge purpose comms, and I mean, you'd sit there crying from these beautiful stories and whatever, and they were beautiful and they were lovely. I'm not trying to be facetious, but if you think of the economy and the context of the everyday South African, okay, their wallets are constrained. It's a really volatile environment at the moment. So what I predict is that brands would realize the importance of balancing out the functional and the emotional, and maybe upweighting a bit more on the functional to remind people the value and the essence of their brand, and it's particularly for premium brands. They're going to have to really work hard to you know demonstrate. So I do feel that we'll probably see some of that coming into the industry, as we go over the next couple of years. Satire is big at the moment, so I think that that will continue. And then we spoke about this idea of the age of realism.
Very nice. Thank you, Sai. And thank you to everybody for listening today. If you enjoyed this episode as much as Sina and I have, please subscribe to our podcast. It's called Future Proof Mzansi, and you can find us on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts. And we look forward to hearing topics that you're interested in us exploring on your behalf. So till next time, we'll see you guys.